If the Goth Woo you heard from Morgue last time didn't satisfy you, he's back with some more.
People generally think that science is all about truth, but as we'll show in this video, it is nowhere near the truth, and its explanations about your existence and your purpose are just as absurd as mainstream religion.
Science has no explanation for your purpose because science doesn't recognize that you have any purpose.
Every era thinks that they have it all figured out, and the ideas of the past were crazy.
No, they don't. We know we currently don't have everything figured out. Scientists certainly don't believe this because if they did, there would be nothing for them to investigate.
Those born in the early ages of humanity thought that their primitive stories about creation were true, and those born in the Christian era thought that their religious ideas were true, and most born today think that scientific materialism is true.
What does it mean to say that something exists if it isn't material? That is, that it is neither matter nor energy or a function of matter or energy.
But in actuality, the people of the future will look back on scientific materialism as a primitive and childish view of reality. Don't get trapped by the consciousness of the era that you were born into. In 100 years, science will look nothing like it does today. So if you are really looking for truth, then have an open mind and weigh everything we are about to say with logic and reason. You see, people assume that scientific materialism is rational. However, that is blatantly incorrect. Our system, Hyperianism, is mathematical, rationalist, and deductive, while science is about sense data, empiricism, and induction. Science is an empirical system, which is opposed to rationalism.
I don't know what you mean by opposed, but it certainly isn't opposed in the sense that it denies rationalist conclusions. It doesn't say that untestable conclusions derived a priori are false, only that they are not knowledge. The epistemology to which I subscribe is pragmatism. I hold something to be true insofar as I can use it to accurately and most parsimoniously predict future observations. All other ideas, even if true by some other standard, are simply useless. A conclusion deductively derived that is either contradicted by observation or which can't make any falsifiable predictions about future observations is useless. There is nothing to be gained by believing in it. It can't be used to develop technology or prepare for future events.
This can't be stressed enough. Science is not about reason. Science is about empiricism. The definition of empiricism is the doctrine that all knowledge is derived from sense experience.
Yes, I don't see the point of granting a deductively derived conclusion the status of knowledge if you can't use it for predicting experience.
Whereas rationalism is the doctrine that all knowledge is based on reason and not on religious faith or sense experience. These two views are opposite, and never forget that science is an empirical system, not a rational system. Furthermore, science is inductive, whereas our system is deductive. Deduction is a method of reasoning that guarantees 100% that the conclusion is true no matter what.
False. If the premises of a deductive argument are false, then the conclusion can be false. You can have a deductive argument that's perfectly valid, but nonetheless unsound. For example, here's a perfectly valid deductive argument. Premise 1. All residents of Paris are citizens of Japan. Premise 2. Bob Saget is a resident of Paris. Therefore, conclusion, Bob Saget is a citizen of Japan. If the premises were true, then the conclusion would logically have to be true, and the conclusion would be proven. But not all valid deductive arguments have true premises. And where do premises come from? If we want to learn about the universe, how do we derive these premises if not empirically? Even if we commit ourselves to only deriving deductive rather than inductive conclusions, we can't learn about geology, biology, astronomy, etc. with reason alone. We need to observe these things empirically.
While induction is a method based on repeated tests that only ever gives a probability of something being true. No matter how good the inductive test is, it always has the probability of being wrong.
But we can't make very many predictions with deduction alone. How are we to navigate the world without employing physical constants and laws that are inductively inferred?
Deduction is about guaranteed truth, while induction only gives a probability of being true. For example, classical mechanics was once considered to be absolutely true, and you were considered crazy by the scientific establishment if you thought otherwise.
That's bullshit. If that were the case, they never would have accepted evidence to the contrary. Evidence which was empirically gathered, by the way.
However, today it is known that classical mechanics is completely and utterly false.
No, it isn't. If it were completely false, then objects at rest would never stay at rest, and no actions would ever have an equal and opposite reaction. This is not the case. Classical mechanics is not considered completely false. Its range of applicability is simply limited.
It's been replaced by quantum mechanics. Now, understand what we're saying. Science has been great at coming up with advances in technology and medicine, and that's wonderful. But just because science comes up with material inventions does not mean that they know the truth about reality. That is a huge logical fallacy.
It doesn't aim at finding the truth about reality as you define truth. It doesn't claim to. That is a huge straw man fallacy. It tries to find ways of thinking that consistently predict observation.
And fallacies are everywhere. For example, if a person prayed to God for someone that was sick to get better, and they did get better, it does not mean that it was because of the prayer. And just because science can come up with smartphones and smart pads does not mean that they know anything about the underlying nature of reality. In fact, classical mechanics is responsible for all of these advances, and even getting people to the moon. But it is a fact that classical mechanics is 100% wrong.
No, it's not 100% wrong. If it were 100% wrong, then the fact that it is so consistently useful would just be a total coincidence. Do you really think that the efficacy of classical mechanics is merely a coincidence? The difference between classical mechanics and prayer is that within its range of applicability, classical mechanics is consistently effective and prayer is not consistently effective.
And has been completely refuted and replaced by quantum mechanics. Even though classical mechanics is definitely incorrect, it can still create the technology to put a person on the moon. Material success does not equal truth.
Not by your preferred definition of truth, but it does warrant belief when it's the most parsimonious explanation.
Scientists like to pretend that they're on the side of logic and reason, when the opposite is true. They put their faith in the senses.
No, they don't. Inductive inference is not faith.
And are just as dogmatic about it as a mainstream religious person.
If that were the case, there wouldn't be a debate among physicists right now regarding whether string theory, which so far is largely untestable but deductively valid, should even be considered a theory. If they were dogmatic about this, nobody would ever have called it a theory to begin with.
Max Planck, the famous physicist and who was the originator of quantum theory, said, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Science progresses one funeral at a time."
That's demonstrable bullshit. If that were true, no scientists would have ever changed their minds. Hendrik Lorentz abandoned Lorentzianism when relativity was shown to work better. Stephen Hawking no longer believes some of his own earlier work.
And this all stems from scientism's dogmatic refusal to contemplate a non-local, mathematical existence outside of space-time.
What the fuck is a mathematical existence? Math is a form of description. To say that math can exist on its own is to say that descriptions can have some kind of reality without actually describing anything. It doesn't make any sense. Descriptions that have no reference are fictions by definition. They can't be real. I don't reject this idea because of any dogma. I reject it because it is self-contradictory. Mathematical Platonism fails by both empiricist and rationalist standards. Thanks again for helping me out on Patreon.